Trump believes video games glorify and contribute to the culture of violence that leads to mass shootings
and ignore at the federal level, particularly, where they can do something about the video games
are real gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace.
What's up, everybody? Ajax here. Welcome to the channel. Today, I want to talk about society's attack on video games and why it might be one of the main reasons that we feel guilt for playing them. Let's get right into it. I believe there are two main reasons that a person might feel guilt about playing video games. The first of which has to do with the effects that video games have on procrastination. There are two types of procrastination, short-term and long-term. Most people are familiar with the concept of short-term procrastination. This is deadline-based, where the individual will put off specific tasks until the last possible minute when the logic-driven portion of the brain has no choice but to take over and initiate crunch time. Most people tend to get their stuff done when panic mode sets in. Long-term procrastination, however, flies under the conscious radar because this happens when there is no deadline, and therefore no opportunity for logic to step on the mic. Most video games perpetuate long-term procrastination in a person because of how their brain operates while they play them. Sure, your senses are linked to your brain and provide signals to it constantly, but the most important thing to understand here is that your brain interprets those signals without context. It's constantly trying to work out the easiest way to get what it wants, and when the brain is flooded with dopamine and the body barely had to work for it, it will mark that instance as a source of super easy pleasure and seek to do it again whenever it can. So the next time you're presented with the option to do something, your subconscious mind now has to make the choice between the path of least resistance and what you most likely needed to or wanted to get done. Now, how well a person handles this decision is controlled by a number of other factors, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but the simple awareness of this issue can make a big difference when learning to recognize instances that you would like to change. For me, guilt from playing video games has had an ironic life cycle. It started for reasons that I have already mentioned and will later mention, but has come full circle back around to honestly feeling guilty for not playing video games. Too many times I have been excited for the release of a new game, purchased it day of, played it for like 4 or 5 hours, and then on the next day I decide to play something else, only to never come back to that game again. My video game completion rate has a huge influence on my guilt surrounding video games. Though I thought I was alone for quite some time, I now realize that there are a considerable amount of you shiny object syndrome victims out there like myself. This is the tendency for someone to chase something new, like a trend, an idea, or a goal, rather than to stay focused on what they're doing. Personally, I blame this on side quests, but this way of operating inside the video game world leaks into my real life when Steam sends me a notification that a game from my wish list is on sale. But you're nowhere near finishing the last one, or the one before that, or the 37 before that. But it's only on sale for 12 hours and it's 50% off. You know you're gonna play it eventually. You might as well buy it now while it's on sale. Good thinking, bro. One copy of Cyberpunk 2077, please. But listen, personally, I believe this thought process and way of feeling can be attributed to society's perception of video games and gamers as a whole. Obviously, the perception of games has come a long way, but that doesn't mean that everybody is on board with them these days. It's been widely accepted that making a career out of playing video games, while rare, is entirely possible, and the kids that grew up alongside the development of these games are all adults now, maybe even parents. The average age of a gamer is 33 years old, if you could believe it. But there's been a lot of noise surrounding video games over the last half a century, so that 33-year-old gamer has most likely heard all of the page-turner headlines like video games are rotting your brain and 14-year-old boy pays for prostitution and then beats prostitute, blames on Grand Theft Auto. Society's campaign against video games has been around since, honestly, the conception of these games, but One of the first instances of public controversy between the media and game developers came in 1976 when a game called Death Race was pulled from the shelves. Death Race was a black and white lo-fi game that had a more advanced feel than its predecessor, the famous Pong. You earned points for running over as many gremlins as possible, but the public was outraged at the fact that when you ran over a gremlin, you heard so the manufacturer literally pulled the game from the market. This would spark a litany of attacks by the media on the video game industry over the next half a century. Instances like this would culminate and then later lead to the creation of the ESRB, the Entertainment Software Rating Board. Researchers, professors, psychologists, and even attorneys started frantically looking for a way to prove a correlation between violent video games and violent behavior, but to no avail. But even 50 years is not much time to collect long-term data, especially when you consider that before the internet, the spread of information was exponentially slower. And it's only recently that games have developed to a point of realistic violence. Games like Mortal Kombat and GTA have notorious reputations for paving this path with a plethora of bloodied corpses, and have been around for long enough now for there to at least be a little long-term data. And if you're as curious on the matter as I was, I'll link the article in the description below. But whether you care or even pay attention to the specifics of the feud between society and video games, there is simply no way that the existence of this background noise does not affect your subconscious, even to the most self-aware of individuals. After society's failure to scientifically link violent behavior to violent video games, they started down a new path. The video games are rotting your brain, stop wasting your life playing video games path. I mean, listen, too much of anything is unhealthy for someone. But it's such a flimsy argument to take the extreme versions of gamers and say that just because they play 12 hours a day and are clearly addicted, if you drive games, you will be like this too. They make blanket statements with no data to back it up, and they get away with it because it's something that sounds like it would be true. But here's my 2 cents. We're constantly fed direct and indirect messages by the public that dictate what's good, what's fashionable, what's hip, what's trending, and also what's bad, what's embarrassing, what's ugly. Most people have made that connection by now, but awareness of it does not make us impervious to it. In short, most of us have been brainwashed by what the masses have deemed to be desirable and undesirable. My question to you is, why does the public get to decide that for you? Why not, instead of asking yourself, would society accept me if I do this, ask yourself, would I accept me if I do this? Maybe you would feel differently about gaming if you learned what brain analyst Daphne Bavelier has to say about fast-paced, first-person shooters.
We can use brain imaging and look at the impact of video game on the brain. And we do find many changes, but the main changes are actually to the brain networks that control attention. One part is a parietal cortex, the other one is a frontal lobe, and another one is the anterior cingulate. Now, when we do brain imaging, we find that all 3 of these networks are actually much more efficient in people that play action games.
The rest of this video is super cool, and I don't want to spoil any more of it, so as always, links in the description. I briefly spoke on the perception of time in my last video about grinding in video games. If you happen to be enjoying this one so far, and you haven't seen that one, I would suggest checking it out. This is essentially a subcategory of what that video is about. And if you have seen it, my apologies for the redundant information, but let me briefly explain the 3 ways that us humans perceive time. The first of which is long-short. This is when the passing of time in the moment feels incredibly slow, like waiting for your number to be called at the DMV. But even though the time was perceived as long in the moment, no lasting memories were created during that period. So later down the road, you hardly remember how miserable that time at the DMV was. Short-long, however, is sort of the opposite. This is when, in the moment, you are so busy creating lasting memories that time is perceived as extremely fast. But this type of perception has a more lasting effect on your brain. It feels like that day at your favorite theme park holds much more of a significant place in your memory than a really slow day at work. Finally, there's short. This is when time flies by in the moment due to constant stimulation or micro decisions, but is also later marked as insignificant. Experiencing the majority of video games as short can leave a gamer feeling guilty when the sun sets on a long day of gaming and he or she realizes that they have nothing to show for it. But I ask you this, if you spent the entire day performing calculus or learning a new language, would you feel the same way? Probably not, even if your vocation would never require the use of it. You would most likely feel good about having committed the entire day to working on something like that. But let's think about this a little further. If you have no use for calculus in your vocation or life, what do you really have at the end of the day for having done math as opposed to play video games? A few pencil scribbles on a piece of paper, that's what. So why do we feel so much better about having done this all day rather than playing video games? You will have experienced the calculus as short or long most likely, so in memory, these instances are equally as important. Could it be that society has determined that performing calculus is learning and learning equals good, and that playing video games is wasteful and that wasteful equals bad? I mean, it just kind of makes me wonder, what else has the public determined is good for me? Money? Because everyone is always telling me I should make more money. So maybe I feel guilty because instead of putting forth that extra effort at work that might get me promoted in, say, 5 years, I spent the entire Saturday enjoying myself. How dare I? Because I need to accumulate as much money as possible because that's what makes a person happy, not using that money to do what makes a person happy. So what you're saying, Ajax, is that I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. Listen, don't take my words out of context. Public opinion is not the worst thing in the world, and in some cases, we genuinely need to consider it, at least as a reference point when determining the morality of a decision. But desirability is intrinsic to each person, so allowing subliminal messages from the media to influence what we think is important to us is something that we all must attempt to avoid, lest we become sheep. I mean, maybe it just so happens that what you truly enjoy is exactly what the public opinion has laid out for you, and if so, that's totally okay. You be you. Just make sure that you are being you. That's it for now. Ajax out. Hey guys, if you're still here, that means you watched the video all the way to the end, and I want to really thank you. I truly appreciate you doing that. I tried something new with this video, a different format. I just sort of wanted to see what you guys thought about it. I wanted to get some feedback. I'm not sure if I'm entirely in love with it. I kind of like my old format more, but I just want to see what is more engaging to you guys. So if you happen to have any thoughts, leave them in the comments below. It'd be really helpful. Okay, bye. See ya. You can leave now. All right.